I'll see you soon.
Tonight's upload is brought to you by our patrons from the Patreon page. That's Cecilia Spears, Hawaii, Carl Leakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Aaron Alexa, Allison Seib, Ryan Woodward, Bree, and Bonanza Jellybean. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel through Patreon. And if anybody listening right now enjoys the content of the 80 Slasher Librarian YouTube channel and would like to help keep it going and growing for a long time to come, then click the link in the description below and sign up on Patreon for as low as $2 to $5 per month. You get some great rewards depending on the tier you select and early access exclusive content before it reaches YouTube. Appreciate you all. Enjoy tonight's upload of Final Destination. Final Destination, Dead Reckoning, Chapter 8. What the hell? Ben stood by the side of the pool and looked in bemusement at the crazy scene before him. It was just coming up to 7 in the evening at the college campus, a time normally associated with exam revision and long conversations at the coffee shop. But not tonight. The streets around Ben's lodgings were packed with a colorful throng of people, making their way to and from various sorority and fraternity homes, which were decked out in colored streamers. Scantily clad girls prowled the sidewalk in packs, dressed in fascinatingly short miniskirts and high heels. They were watched by the groups of guys sitting up on the concrete walls, some of them shirtless, most of them drinking beer from red and blue paper cups. Beside one of the classier houses, a gang of giggling boys was busy hoisting someone's bicycle up a telegraph pole on a piece of rope. Ben stood and stared as people pushed their way past him, laughing and chatting. There was one major-looking party going on here. How come he hadn't been invited? He reached into his pocket for his cell phone. If Eric had known about this party and not invited him, the dude was seriously dead. Ring, 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 and click. Damn it! Answer the phone! Ben listened to the message, waited for the beep, then belched loudly into the phone and hung up. Feeling infinitely satisfied, he stowed his phone in his jeans pocket and gazed around him with interest. A white marquee tent had been set up on the grass beside one of the bigger fraternity houses, and the overflow from the tent spilled out onto the surrounding grounds. Tables were set up around it, groaning under the weight of barrels of cheap imported wine. Shiny black SUVs cruised slowly up and down the street, disgorging fresh groups of partygoers, who all headed straight to the wine tent. The entrance was guarded by two stern-looking bouncers, checking people's IDs as they walked in. Ben shook his head wonderingly. Freaky country. You could go buy a gun from a shop on any main street, but you couldn't get a drink until you were 21. There was a slightly hushed air to the revelry, but Ben didn't notice that. He was still concentrating on the girls in the miniskirts, and there were so many of them. He gazed at the nearest girl, who was standing with her back to him, flirting with some muscle-bound meathead in a Letterman sweater. At 20, Ben had never been laid, and it was currently one of the biggest thoughts occupying his mind, besides football and a strange craving for a really, really good Chinese dinner. He unconsciously licked his lips as he studied the girl's rear profile, marveling at how tiny her waist was and how well her miniskirt hung on her, barely skimming her full behind, and yet still managing to hide it infuriatingly well. Ben stared hard at the drink in her hands, physically willing her to drop it so that she would bend over for just a second, which was all that he needed. Ain't gonna happen, bro. Ben tore his eyes away from the girl in the miniskirt. Eric was standing beside him, his arms folded. His bright orange shirt was open to the waist, and he was wearing a garland of bottle tops around his neck. From the expression on his face, Armani himself couldn't have dressed him any better. He winked at Ben. Watch, he mouthed, then gave a long, low whistle. The girl in the miniskirt glanced over her shoulder. Eric stuck out his tongue and waggled it around obscenely. The girl curled her lip and gave him a look of pure disdain before turning back around, pulling the hem of her skirt further down. The meathead gave Eric a warning look, then put his arm around the girl's shoulders and walked her away towards the wine tent. Eric laughed in delight. Strike one! He punched the air in triumph, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I think she wants me. What do you think? He pulled a fresh bottle of beer out of his backpack and opened it up with his Swiss Army knife. I think you should have told me there was a party tonight, dude, said Ben. He sounded hurt. I've been sitting up there in my room all night long, stressing about shite. Nobody told me there was something happening." He looked at Eric meaningfully. "Party? What party?" Eric looked around him, all innocence, sipping on his beer. "Oh, you mean this?" He smiled, waving his hands around airily. "These are just my bitches. They've come here for the express pleasure of hanging out with yours truly." "You mean this isn't a party?" "Hell no, but I can see how you might be confused." "By what? All the food and the skirts and the drinking?" "Correct, but still not a party." "Then what is it, for Christ's sakes?" "It's a wake." Eric looked smug. "A what?" "A wake. To celebrate the lives of the deceased." Even Eric had the decency to look a little abashed. He ripped a colorful flyer off a nearby tree and handed it to Ben. "Here." Ben inspected the flyer. It had a picture of a skull on it, superimposed over an old picture of Club Kitty. The writing beneath read, "Come celebrate our lives." The whole thing was extremely tacky, and the pink neon paper it was printed on certainly wasn't helping matters any. Life went on, thought Ben wryly. It didn't matter who'd just died. As long as at least 2 human beings were left alive on the face of the planet, somewhere there'd be a party. It was one of the few certainties in life. Eric took the flyer back, answering Ben's unspoken question. "One of the dudes who died left some money. I'm told he asked his folks once that if anything ever happened to him, they should throw a party. So they did." Ben wasn't surprised. A lot of students had been in that club when it collapsed. The memorial service was in 10 days' time, and he hadn't a clue what to wear. The only black clothes he owned had band logos on them, and he was sure that attending a funeral on a top that had Slayer printed on it in big bloody letters wouldn't be very appropriate, even for him. "It's a cool idea about the party?" "Yeah." Eric thought for a moment. "Poor sons of bitches." "Yeah?" They stood for a moment in silence while people drank and boozed and laughed around them. When Ben judged that a suitably respectable amount of time had passed, he cleared his throat hopefully. "So? Any of that beer left, then?" "That depends," said Eric, a malicious gleam coming into his eyes. "On what?" "On what you'll do to get it." It was much, much later. Ben sat on a low stone wall, watching the floor intently. It was pitching from side to side like the deck of a ship on the high seas. He was sure it wasn't supposed to be doing that. "Funny floor?" he giggled, pointing an unsteady finger at the ground as it dipped and swayed past him. He hiccuped loudly, then shook his head like a dog. His stomach felt as if someone had poured an entire ocean of fizzy water into him, then put a cork in his throat and shaken him up for about half an hour. He smacked his lips loudly, looking woozily around him. Somehow, after 10 pints of beer, he was still incredibly thirsty. He wondered vaguely whether there was any drink left anywhere, or whether he'd drunk at all. Beer was good. Right on cue, someone walked past and kicked a beer bottle over towards him. It rolled across the sidewalk with a glassy clanking sound before coming to rest against his outstretched boot. Ben tipped his head on one side and gave it a look of intense scrutiny, his eyebrows weaving around like mating caterpillars as he strove to focus. His face fell. "'Tis empty," he announced, then slowly fell off the wall. The ground was surprisingly comfortable. Ben lay on his side and congratulated himself on this new discovery. The concrete was still warm from the heat of the day, and it smelled strongly of alcohol. Or maybe it was him that smelled strongly of alcohol. He tried to move his head to determine the source of the smell, but discovered that he was too comfortable to even move. But that was all right with him. He lay still, grinning happily. The ground was so warm. It was just like some big, flat, warm woman, he thought, snuggling up to it happily. What was that phrase? Mother Earth? Ben smiled at his own cleverness. Mother Earth? What a wonderful woman. What a wonderful woman she was. He reached out an arm and patted the ground fondly. Then he threw up. "Hey, jerk off!" "Huh?" Ben wiped his mouth and rolled over, groaning. Someone blurry was talking to him, backlit by a strong light. He tried to shield his eyes with his hand and missed, poking himself in the eye instead. He lay still, deciding that movement wasn't a good idea. "Get up, we need you!" Eric poked Ben in the ribs with his boot. "Hey, don't be doing that." "Come on, you can't lie there, you great doofus. You're blocking the sidewalk." Eric grabbed hold of Ben's outflung arms and half lifted, half dragged him onto the grass, away from the road. Ben rode over and looked up at the sky, wishing heartily that he had something to eat to get this horrible taste out of his mouth. He wished heartily for some Chinese food. There were no stars above him, and this made him feel oddly sad. "Are you going to get up, or am I going to have to get you up?" Eric sounded far too bright and bouncy for someone who had just consumed almost an entire keg of beer by himself. Ben wondered whether he had been cheating. He certainly wouldn't put it past him. "No, I'm not getting up." Ben burped and squeezed his eyes tight shut, while his brain spun around violently inside his skull. Oh, this wasn't good. "I'll get up any minute now." "Loser!" Eric grabbed Ben's arms again, heaving him up into a sitting position against the wall. Ben blearily opened his eyes to see a semicircle of blurry strangers watching him. Some of them were girls, very pretty blurry girls, all looking at him. His brow creased in puzzlement. "Who?" he asked the world in general. "Friends, nice friends. Come on, drink this." Eric pushed a glass of cold water into Ben's hands. "And try not to puke on me." Ben drank the water down in one gulp, wondering vaguely why his front was starting to feel cold and wet. Was it raining? He looked up at the sky and almost fell over again. He was pretty sure it wasn't raining, so why was his front getting wet? He sighed. It was just another one of those mysteries that he hadn't had the answers to. He finished the water surprisingly quickly and handed the empty glass back to one of the Eric-shaped blurs hovering in front of him. "Here, up you come." Eric pulled Ben bodily to his feet, supporting him on one muscular arm. Ben stood there groaning and swaying gently. The ground seemed like it was a very long way away, like his legs had stretched and grown until they were the length of a tree trunk. He weighed muzzily down at the ground, which was doing its swaying from side to side thing again. "Ready to rock?" Eric whooped, punching the air and making Ben jump. "Yeah!" yelled the watching crowd. "Yeah!" Ben hiccuped, a preoccupied expression on his face. "All right then, let's go, people. You know what you have to do." The crowd dispersed, marching off in twos and threes across the grass. What's happening?" "Eric, what's happening, mate?" asked Ben, focusing on the central Eric blur on his third attempt. "We're doing dares," said Eric, his eyes glinting. "First one to complete their dare for the evening gets this." He swept his hand behind him to reveal an entire barrel of beer propped up against his red pickup truck. "Is that beer?" Ben's eyes lit up. "Yup, but it's not for you, buddy. Took me a long time to get hold of this." "Did you steal it? Did you steal it? Did you steal it?" "Nah, I requisitioned it." Eric smiled and punched Ben on the arm. "Gotta get your terminology right if you're going to be a college student. Now, this is our dare." He reached into his bag and pulled out a piece of paper. There was a diagram drawn on it in a blue biro. "This is the security building. All the security guards live there. This," he stabbed a finger at the map, "is the elevator. What we're going to do is stop it from working." "Why?" "Because, my friend, we want to have a good night. I have a lot of plans for tonight. But there's some stuff I have to do first. Alcohol-related stuff. If security comes snooping around my block in the next hour, we will not have a good night. Comprende?" Ben's face pulled 5 different conflicting expressions before settling on one of bemused stupidity. "Not really?" he hiccuped. "That's because you're drunk," said Eric, so patiently that Ben wanted to hit him. "Focus. This is the plan. If we can stop the elevator working, we can keep security holed up for an hour. They're all up there right now, having a meeting about how to deal with us guys tonight. Assigning shifts and whatnot. Eric glanced behind him, lowering his voice. All we have to do is keep them in there for an hour. If they can't leave the building, they can't fuck things up for me. I mean, us. Ben rubbed his forehead with the effort of thought. Won't they? Excuse me? Take the stairs instead? If you break the elevator? Thought of that. That's Lou and Sharon's job, blocking the fire escape. They're off over there right now with the police tape and the crazy glue for the door handles. The guards will figure it out eventually, but in the meantime... Eric waved a hand at the party in front of him, taking in the food, the drink, and more importantly, the girls. All of this is ours. Ben nodded, impressed in a faraway, distant way. His stomach was empty, and he realized that he was starting to feel hungry. Very hungry. He turned to Eric hopefully. You got any Chinese food? It was later. Food had been had. Ben was starting to feel a whole lot better, although the 4 extra beers he'd drunk on his way through the parking lot hadn't helped matters so much. So, what's the plan, Batman? Shh! Sorry, Ben giggled. His voice seemed to come from a long way away. He ducked back down behind the hedge and watched the last of the security guys disappear into the tall brick security building, closing the door behind them. He was feeling a little bit more sober now, thanks to the 3 big cups of coffee Eric had forced him to drink, but he still had enough alcohol surging through his bloodstream to kill a small horse. Everything seemed very funny indeed, for some obscure reason. His head was still spinning, and despite the huge portion of fries he'd just consumed, he was still starving. His stomach growled, and he patted his belly to quiet it. You sure there's no more food? No, I ate it all. What? All of it? Yup. Eric was straight-faced. Everything on campus, and for the love of God, will you be quiet? Why? There's no one out there? There's windows up there. They could hear us, dude. Oh, I'm really scared. Ben rocked back on his heels and peered up at the building. All the lights were out, save the ones on the topmost floor, 8 stories up. The windows were indeed open. He snorted in mirth. They won't hear us from all the way up there. Are you kidding? Remember what happened in the cafeteria last week? Ben scrunched up his face with the effort of remembering. A light dawned. You mean when you were in the lunch line and you said, Hey, I wonder what'll happen if I drop my fork in the fruit smoothie mixer tank? And then the security guard threw you out? Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. That dude was standing across the other side of the room. Nobody was hearing that good. Nobody. It was kind of scary, Ben admitted. He ducked further down behind the hedge, looking worried. Here, do you think he heard that thing I said about his gay little hat? Dude, why do you think I ran? Eric shook his head. You've got no idea. I don't even know why I let you hang with me sometimes. Now zip it and hand me that bag. Ben obliged, muttering under his breath. He passed Eric the big bag of tools that they purloined from the janitor's closet. Purloined. That was another good word he'd learned today. Hell, if he kept learning new words at this rate, he'd know the whole goddamn dictionary by the end of the year. Eric had told him that it didn't mean steal, as he thought it had. In Eric's idiosyncratic vocabulary, it merely meant borrowed indefinitely. Ben broke off a long stem of grass and chewed fitfully on the end. Eric borrowed a lot of things indefinitely lately. He said that it wasn't wrong. After all, he'd reasoned most people borrowed things from school or work, like office supplies or those little sachets of sugar that they gave out for free in restaurants. It was just one of those things that people did. It didn't make them bad people, it just made them, well, people. But not Eric. He only went for the good stuff. Most of the things he owned were permanently on lease from other people. Ben knew that Eric's CD collection alone was borrowed from at least 60 different people, all of whom were currently driving themselves crazy, wondering where in the blazes they'd put their limited edition Megadeth CD box set. Eric was an old pro. He reasoned that since students were supposed to borrow stuff, traffic signals, street signs, and whatnot, he may as well go ahead and have himself a ball. Since he got his job at the bar last month, they'd never been out of alcohol, shot glasses, bar towels, or cutlery. and as an added bonus, they now had enough giant industrial-sized reels of bathroom tissue to last them pretty much indefinitely. Eric said it was perks. Ben privately called it something else, although he wouldn't dare say it out loud for fear of getting his head kicked in. And besides which, he really hated buying bathroom tissue. He kept his mouth shut as Eric rifled through the bag, pulling out various monkey wrenches and hammers, before finally settling on a miniature crowbar, which he stashed inside his shirt. He dropped the bag behind the bush and motioned to Ben. "All set. Let's go." Ben followed Eric, crouching low as they ran across the manicured grass, heading towards the security building as fast as they could. That was the great thing about being drunk, thought Ben happily, as he bounced and skipped along behind Eric. He may not be able to see straight, but his legs felt like they could go on running for hours all on their own. It was like they were supercharged or something. It was hugely entertaining to find that he could run as fast as he liked, without getting tired or falling over. "Oh!" Eric ran back and held out his hand. "Get up, quick, come on, someone will see us." Okay. Ben flopped over into the flower bed and levered himself to his feet. "Give me a break, I tripped. Shite." "On what? We're on grass." "On her. Yeah, I tripped on the grass, I did." Ben broke into a shrill giggling fit and then subsided with a cough. "You're stupid." "But it's very long grass, ain't it?" "And you're very stupid." Shaking his head, Eric started trotting towards the security building. Jerk. Dusk was falling, and the security building's lamps were starting to come on, one by one, bathing them in an orange glow. He prayed that nobody had seen them. The pair of them ran over to the back door. It was locked. "Aw, shit." Eric looked around him, searching for a way in. His eyes lit upon a half-open window on the first floor, and he made a snap decision. "Stay right here. Yell out if anyone comes." The window was a good 12 feet up off the ground. Eric tightened the straps on his backpack, then rolled up his sleeves. This should only take a second. There was a big square iron grill over the ground floor window. It was about 6 feet long and was topped with sharp points, presumably to discourage students from climbing on it. There was a low stubby tree underneath it, surrounded by a bed of ivy and nasty-looking cactus plants. Eric remembered how easily that Jess girl had got over that fence last night. He wasn't a big fan of climbing things, but now, needs must and all that. He put one hand on the lowest branch of the tree, testing to see how strong it was. A fall into that patch of cactus plants would not put him in a good mood. The tree seemed strong enough, so he began climbing it as quickly as he dared. "What are you doing?" "I'm climbing the damn tree. What does it look like I'm doing?" Ben sniggered. "You look really stupid. You climb like a wee girl." "You think I care?" Eric drew level with the metal window grill and cautiously reached out a hand towards it. Getting a firm grip, he swung himself out of the tree. So he was hanging by both hands from the top of the grill, dangling 6 feet above the ground. He kicked upwards with his feet, getting his boot on the bottom rung of the grill, wedging it firmly in between the bars. A small shower of plaster dust trickled down the wall as the nails that held the grill to the wall pulled out slightly under his weight. Oblivious to this, Eric got his other foot on the grill and slowly pulled himself upright. A second trickle of dust later, the grill slid out slightly further. Eric craned his neck upwards. The ledge of the open window was an arm's length above him. He checked the distance. It was easily reachable. Something made his nose itch, and Eric sniffed. Damn it! He always got an itch when he had no hands available to scratch it with. Leaning to the side, he ducked his head down level with one of the wicked-looking metal spikes that topped the grill, and carefully rubbed his nose against it. A further shower of brick dust fell out of the wall, trickling unnoticed into the cactus bed below. The grill shook slightly. Itch satisfied, Eric straightened up and pulled himself upright. Now this should be fairly simple. Trying not to look down, Eric reached up with one hand and got a firm grip on the window ledge above him. Transferring his other hand up, he freed his first foot from the grill, which finally gave way under his weight, the nails sliding out of the crumbling brick. The whole thing plunged downwards towards the ground, then halted. Eric cried out in pain, clinging desperately onto the window ledge above him. His foot was still jammed through the bars of the fallen grill, which now dangled from his leg, the weight of it slowly pulling him off the ledge. Eric spun around like a rabbit caught in a trap, kicking frantically. Ben ran forwards. "Are you all right?" he called up. "Do I look like I'm all right?" Eric yelped. The grill weighed a ton, and his leg felt as if it was being pulled out of its socket. He felt his grip starting to slip, and clutched frantically at the ancient brickwork, which was starting to crumble beneath his fingers. He tried to kick the grill off with his other foot, but it was stuck fast. "Give me a hand here!" Ben reached up and caught the dangling grill, supporting it with both hands. "Heavy?" he commented. "Really, I hadn't noticed," said Eric, as his biceps screamed in pain. "Just get it off me, for the love of God!" Staggering slightly, Ben pushed the grill upwards, twisting it back and forth to disengage Eric's boot, which finally came free. Ben jumped back as the grill plunged to the ground, the metal spikes driving deeply into the flower bed. "Shit!" Eric flexed his leg with a wince, then began swinging his body back and forth, trying to get up enough momentum to reach the window. The weight of the grill had badly wrenched his muscles, and he knew he didn't have long before his arms gave out. After a couple of swings, he went for it, straightening his arms into a push-up and arcing his body upwards with all the power he could muster. To his relief, one of his flailing feet caught the window ledge. He scissored his legs, propelling himself upwards, and scrambled through the window, jumping lightly down on the other side. He walked over to the main door and flipped the catch to let Ben in. The interior of the building was brightly lit. The two of them gazed around them for a minute, getting their bearings. Then Eric sauntered casually over to the elevator and pressed the call button. He leaned against the wall, whistling under his breath. To his relief, there were no security cameras inside the lobby. "Okay." He dropped his voice and clicked his fingers in front of Ben, who was gazing owlishly at the brightly lit floor buttons. "Pay attention. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to go in there and cut the power to that thing. If I really mess it up, it should keep those goose upstairs a good couple of hours." "What do I do?" asked Ben, one of nature's little helpers. "Ah, you, my friend, have a very important job." "Which is?" "You're my lookout. Just stay here and tell me if you see anything coming." "Yes, sir." Ben straightened up and saluted. Then he turned and walked over to the door, somehow managing to trip over his own foot before he got there. He had another giggling fit. "Oh, God, help me!" Eric pressed the elevator call button. The lift dinged open and Eric stepped inside and hit the door close switch. Inside, he took a deep breath, hearing the hum of the air conditioner kicking in. His heartbeat started pounding in his temples. This was it. If they pulled this one off, he was home free for the year. He reached into his pocket, checking that his CB radio was switched on. Then he reached inside his shirt and pulled out 3 bags of white powder, stashing them more securely inside the small blue backpack that he was carrying. His mouth felt dry with anticipation. He hoped that Ben had swallowed his line about wanting to drink more freely at the party. He hadn't seen the need to come up with a more elaborate story. Ben was, well, he was Ben. He was stupid. Eric liked stupid. It meant a definite lack of questions, which suited Eric down to the ground. There were 3 guys waiting outside the campus with a truck. One of the guys had enough money for Eric to live on comfortably for a year. Once again, Eric blessed his good luck in finding things. The big party he had gate-crashed at that dude's house last Thursday had provided him with a lot more than free coasters he'd shown to Ben. A random snoop through the guy's CD collection in his room upstairs, and he left with 3 sealed containers of what he guessed was something very naughty indeed, hidden inside several double albums labeled 80s Party Mix. A short walk later, and his chemistry student buddy Kevin had confirmed that it was indeed grade A cocaine. There was enough there to get more than enough booze money to last him well past the end of term. There were so many stupid people in the world. Eric hoped that he would meet more of them soon. He wasn't afraid of getting caught, but he knew he had to move fast. Eric doubted that anyone had seen him come into the party, but knew that he had to get rid of the drugs quickly. The last thing he wanted was to get spot-checked by a campus security guard. If they caught him, they'd have a field day. Reaching into his jacket, he took out his little crowbar and studied the lift's control panel with interest. He knew he had to work quickly. There were 12 assorted buttons under the main panel, marked with obscure phrases like line control and op assist. Eric cursed to himself. He'd been hoping there'd be an obvious power switch somewhere, but he couldn't see one. Putting his backpack on the floor, he ran his hand down the panel, then grunted in satisfaction as his fingers traced an almost invisible seam on one side. There was a hidden compartment under there. This was where the crowbar came in. Eric jammed one end into the seam, expertly wiggling it back and forth to dig into the metal, which buckled and bent around the edges. When he judged it had gone far enough, Eric tensed his arms and pried the crowbar backwards as hard as he could. It took a couple of yanks, but on his third try, the panel popped open. Eric's face fell. Instead of the big red stop button he'd been expecting, the inside of the hatch was filled with a confusing tangle of wires and fuses. There was a circuit board on the left, covered in a little blinking lights, and what looked like a small black transformer box wired to the central circuit board. It was obviously a control unit of some kind, but controlling what? Eric didn't know. It had to be something pretty major for it to be so well hidden. Frowning in concentration, Eric reached into the hatch and took hold of a couple of the thickest wires at random. They were on the ground floor, he knew, so if he pulled out the wrong wires, he wouldn't end up plummeting to his death. The elevator door was open, and he felt fairly sure that he could get out in time if it started to close. Bracing himself, he yanked the wires out of the circuit board. Nothing happened. Eric glanced casually back through the elevator doors, but everything was quiet outside. Perhaps he needed to pull the lot out to have an effect. He poked the hooked end of his crowbar into the hatch, sliding it underneath the main bundle of wires, making sure he got hold of a big loop of them. It was more damage than he wanted to do, but with any luck, it would be chalked down by the security people as a student prank. Leaning back, he tugged on his crowbar. The wires came free with a snap and crackle of electricity, and Eric made a leap for the door as the lights in the elevator went out. He stood outside in the corridor for a couple of seconds, waiting. But nothing else happened. Hardly daring to hope, Eric stepped forward, leaned inside the lift, and experimentally pressed the first floor button. The lights on the control panel were out. The lift remained motionless. The doors didn't so much as even twitch. "Yes!" Eric punched the air, then danced across the lobby to where Ben was waiting. "I did it! I'm the greatest! I'm the GOAT!" he announced, spinning his crowbar on one finger. Ben looked him up and down. "You took your time?" "I know." Eric pocketed his crowbar. "Stupid lift didn't have a stop button." "That's no excuse," Ben said. Then he stopped. He frowned, studying Eric. "Dude, you look different. Why do you look so different, mate?" "I don't know," said Eric patiently. "Why do I look different?" "Because." Ben stared at Eric. Eric fancied that he could hear the cogwheels turning in his friend's brain. "Because something's missing from you. You had something, and now it's gone?" "My bag!" Eric's eyes widened with realization. "Shit, I left it in the elevator." Turning around, he ran back towards the open door. Then he stopped dead. The elevator's call button was flashing orange. Someone was summoning the elevator, and it was responding. As Eric watched in horror, the doors started to slide closed, with his bag full of drugs still inside it. Three floors up, security guard Chris Latshaw was getting a cup of coffee from the corridor drinks machine while he waited for the elevator to arrive. He was a little late for the nightly meeting, but he figured that it would take at least 15 minutes to get started, as any gathering of more than 5 people usually did. There would be a lot of swapping seats, bickering and chatting, followed by the ritual of the getting out of pens and making coffee while they waited for the last person to show up. Security guards were good at procrastination. Some of them made it into an art form. The smarter ones learned that it meant a lot less standing around in the cold. Tonight, however, the last person to arrive was him. Chris yawned and rubbed his eyes, hoping that the meeting would be over quickly. There were a couple of hundred unsupervised brats running around down there, and the sooner they got the evening shift sorted out, the better. The last thing he needed was to have to stay up all night, waiting for the paramedics to come and pump lighter fuel from some kid's stomach. Chris inserted a coffee cartridge and stood by the machine, staring blankly at the wall while the coffee machine fizzed and burped, then poured a stream of hot black coffee into a styrofoam cup. He scratched his stubble absently. He knew that the coffee would taste like shit, as it always did, but at the same time it was strangely addictive shit. He and the other guys couldn't stop drinking it. He glanced at his watch. The elevator was sure taking its time. Opening a little pot of half and half, he stirred it thoughtfully into his coffee. Then on impulse gathered a handful of sugar sachets from the overflowing pot and stuffed them into the back pocket of his uniform. There was so much of the stuff here, no one would miss it. That would save him from having to buy any sugar for a fortnight. The thought made him feel strangely satisfied and almost justified his trip down here. Come on, he muttered, pressing the elevator call button again. He knew on some level that this wouldn't make it come any quicker, but a part of him insisted that the more times he pressed the button, the quicker the damn thing would arrive. Turning back to the coffee machine, he started sorting through the little milk cartons. Now, wasn't he out of milk, too? Pockets bulging, he idly reached out and punched the elevator call button yet again. Downstairs, Eric tore across the lobby, arriving at the elevator just as the door was closing. Performing a heroic leap, he dived between the closing doors just as they slid shut with a clunk. Relieved, he picked up his backpack from the floor and slung it safely over his shoulder. Man, that was close. He patted his bag fondly. No way was he losing all that beer money. Turning around with a sigh of relief, he pressed the door open button. Nothing happened. He pushed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. Oh, crap. Without warning, the lift jolted under his feet and started moving upwards, its lights flickering erratically off and on as it climbed up the building. Eric's eyes swiveled in their sockets towards the control panel. The 8th floor button was lit, glowing a steady orange. Shit! Eric swore, and pounded on the button for the next floor, hoping that it would light up. The button stayed determinedly dark. Moving back across the open hatch, Eric stared hopelessly inside at the tangle of wiring. What the hell wires had he cut? Perhaps he'd just taken out the lighting circuit. All the wires looked the same to him. He couldn't even tell which ones he had pulled out. He stretched out a hand towards the panel, then stopped. What if one of them was live? Perhaps he shouldn't touch them. The last thing he needed was an electric shock. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. The irony of this situation didn't escape him. Here he was, on his way up to a room full of security guards, with several $1,000s worth of cocaine in his backpack. That alone had to be worth several million idiot points. He pressed a couple of elevator buttons at random, then punched the panel in frustration, and flopped backwards against the wall, breathing heavily. Son of a bitch! He felt like the guy who had decided to rob the ATM at a police convention. He pictured the elevator door sliding open onto a room full of uniformed officials, aiming big ugly guns at his head. All the alcohol dancing through his bloodstream was making him paranoid. Okay, think. There had to be a way to stop the elevator. What would Bond do? Probably cut through the doors with a diamond cutter, then repel out of there with the semi-naked woman on his arm, he thought. But in the real world, Eric watched warily as the second-floor light lit up. He hit the open door button as hard as he could, followed by the floor button labeled 2. Still, nothing happened. The lift resolutely carried on towards the 3rd floor. Maybe there was nothing on the 8th floor, Eric thought desperately. Perhaps it was just the janitor calling the elevator to clean it for the night. He held his breath as the elevator bumped to a halt on the 7th floor. He waited for the doors to open, but they stayed reassuringly closed. That was a relief. Perhaps he'd get away after all. Then he almost fell forward as the elevator stopped in its tracks with a thump. What the? There was a loud crackling sound from the vandalized control panel. As Eric watched in dismay, all the floor button lights lit up and started flashing. The whine of the air conditioning died away to a pregnant hum, and the lift shuddered for a moment, then jerked upwards a couple of feet. It stopped again with a loud banging noise. Then all the lights went out, and the elevator started to drop fast. Downstairs in the lobby, Ben leaned against the wall and yawned, waiting for Eric to come back down in the elevator. He felt as if he'd been standing here forever. What was taking him so long? Maybe he'd get stopped to chat up some cute young security girl? Ah, girls. Ben smiled to himself. He liked girls. They were nice. Preoccupied with such thoughts, Ben didn't notice the elevator call button start flashing madly. Nor did he notice the elevator door slide apart, way open, pause, and then jerk closed again. There was a muffled clang from the floor above him. A small spray of sparks trickled out of the gap in the door, vanishing with a snap. What he did notice, however, was the uniformed security guard. He was standing with his back to Ben, reading an official-looking notice pinned to the fire escape, which was sealed off with striped yellow police tape. Ben blinked. He was sure that the dude hadn't been there a minute ago. "Hey, you!" the guard called to Ben. "Do you know what's up with the stairs, man?" "Me, sir? Who, sir? No, sir. No, very definitely not, sir," said Ben. He tried not to hiccup. The security guard stared at him in an odd way. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. "Who, me? No, not at all. In fact, I came..." Ben gestured helplessly with one hand. He was aware that he was moving far too fast. He didn't want the guard to think that he was in the slightest bit drunk. He tried to slow down his arm movements and ended up with a kind of controlled flail. "Oh, miles away, in that direction." He pointed at random and nearly fell over. "Huh?" The security guard was still looking fixedly at Ben. "I thought you looked familiar." "No, not familiar at all, really. Just passing through. Ben stopped and stared at the guard's head. Oh no, that hat. It was so... Ben's face twitched a couple of times while he fought to regain control of his facial muscles. It took him a moment. When he dared, he looked again at the hat. It was round and slightly floppy, and it had a shiny silver star on it, like the ones they gave out in kindergarten. It was also about 3 sizes too small, perched on the guard's balding head like a sailor's cap on the high seas. A single giggle forced its way out past Ben's not-so-iron control. His eyes widened and he clamped his mouth tight shut, a tiny bubble of mirth escaping from between his lips. The security guard gave him a sharp look, but Ben avoided his gaze, concentrating furiously on not looking at the hat. It wasn't the size or shape of it, he knew, or the fact that it was gold. He snuck a quick peek. No, it was the single tassel that got him. It hung down at the back like the tail of a horse. It was also gold, and fluttered wildly whenever the guard moved. The security guard frowned, noticing Ben's frantic expression. Are you looking at my hat?" "No, sir," said Ben, tight-lipped. "Are you sure?" "No, of course not, sir." But now he was looking, and by God, that hat, it was so incredibly gay. The security guard raised his eyebrow at Ben as Ben doubled up, howling with laughter. What now, he thought bitterly. "What's so funny?" he asked, sounding hurt. Ben slapped his hand on the wall, shaking his head frantically. The guard self-consciously straightened his hat. "I like it," he thought defensively. Out loud he said, "So you're in here, why exactly?" He was proud of the exactly measured amount of menace he managed to inject into his voice. He watched as the student's eyes widened. Aha, up to no good. He knew it. Ben sobered up slightly, although little spasms of laughter still shook his shoulders. He said, "We were just leaving?" "We? I mean me? I was just leaving." "I suggest you get going then. This building is off limits tonight. Right?" "Right." There was a pause. "So you'll be going then," said the guard. "Yes, sir. Any minute now," Ben said. There was another pause. The security guard raised his eyebrows expectantly. Okay. Ben turned and started walking towards the door, dragging his feet. The security guard watched him all the way. Weird kid, he thought, turning to press the elevator call button. Then he flew across the room as a giant arc of electricity from the elevator panel earthed itself through his body. He crashed into the far wall and slumped to the ground, groaning. Ben stared at the fallen guard stupidly. Then he turned and looked at the elevator call button. It was flashing and sparking. "Eric!" he shouted. There was no reply. After a moment, Ben sighed and reached into his pocket for his cell phone. His brow creased in drunken confusion. Now, what was the number for the emergency services over here again? Oh, fuck! Eric crouched down in the elevator in the dark, clutching at the wall, his heart hammering. The elevator had dropped about 10 feet before the emergency brakes had cut in, slamming him to a halt. Eric wiped the sweat from his brow. He had to get out of here, and quickly, in case the elevator dropped again. He couldn't believe what he'd done. He'd only cut a few tiny wires. A few tiny wires behind a big, thick fuck-off panel, he reminded himself grimly. Moron! Eric stepped forwards cautiously in the dark, his hand stretched out in front of him like a sleepwalker. His fingertips brushed the cold metal of the elevator door, and he jerked them back as if stung, visualizing the door's opening and sending him plunging downwards to a grisly, gear-filled death in the guts of the elevator shaft. That wouldn't be cool, not cool at all, in fact. Eric stayed absolutely still, hoping against hope that the lights would come back on. Maybe this was just a temporary power glitch. A minute dragged past. It got noticeably warmer inside the elevator. Nope, definitely not just a temporary power glitch. This baby was out of service for good. Eric started to sweat. Pictures of the emergency services arriving and having to cut the elevator doors open raced through his mind. There would be no escape for him and his little bag of drugs. He could see the headlines now. There was only one thing for it. Hello? Eric called out, steeling himself. He really didn't want to be doing this. He felt like such a loser, but knew that he had no other choice. He hammered on the door, then waited. There was no reply. He hadn't really been expecting one. The metallic echoes of his voice rang back, as though taunting him. Eric drew in his breath, ready to call out again. Then he stopped. Was it just him, or was the elevator moving? He held his breath, listening intently. There was a very slight sensation of movement, although he couldn't tell if he was moving up or down. The elevator was definitely creeping in one direction or the other. Hey, this might be good. If the thing was moving, then it still had power, which meant he might be able to make it work again. Moving carefully across the far wall, Eric ran his hand downwards until his fingers brushed the recessed call buttons. He pressed them all, one by one, but nothing happened. He was well and truly stuck. Stupid elevator! Frustrated, Eric lifted his hand and gave the panel a hefty smack. The vibrations of the impact traveled up and down the wall. Inside the service hatch, unbeknownst to Eric, one of the wires moved a fraction of an inch and touched one of the other wires. It was not a good wire for it to touch. With a fizz of electricity, the power to the emergency brakes cut out. Before Eric had a chance to draw breath to cry out, they released with a clunk. The elevator dropped like a boulder. Will Eric survive his elevator freefall of death? Will Ben ever get laid and get Chinese food? Will the 80s slasher librarian reach 6,000 subscribers on YouTube? Find out next time. Same slasher time, same slasher channel. Alright guys, this has been Chapter 8 of Final Destination Dead Reckoning. This chapter was a little bit confusing to me because I really thought, take Eric from the beginning of the book. Total musclehead, right? Just a piece of crap jerk, right? Well, I thought, at least in my opinion, I thought the whole point of his time with Jess, when they were together like that whole night after the explosion, was a chance for him to have some character growth, and I really thought we saw that with this character. You know, that he had matured a little bit in that night and wasn't so meat-headed and judgmental and stuff. But it's like, that never happened. He's like back to how he was at the club, and now he's going to be a drug dealer and he stole all these drugs, all this cocaine from somebody, and those people didn't try to look into who took it from him. He doesn't have a bunch of hardcore drug dealers after him. Who's buying the drugs from... I don't know. This whole chapter seemed contrived. It really did. I don't know, compared to the rest of the story. But take that away for a moment, because this book has not been like, you know, the great American novel or anything, or the great British novel, since it was a British novel. It has just been an entertaining Final Destination story, and if I take that into account and I put away these inconsistencies, I will say it was an enjoyable, suspenseful chapter. I really enjoyed the banter back and forth between Eric and Ben. I really enjoyed the whole Scottish guy being drunk. That's the best I can do, is like a fast Irish accent for Scottish. Sorry, guys. I thought it was funny how he was reacting to that security guard's hat, although I didn't like him using the derogatory word gay to describe it. I thought the whole elevator thing was pretty cool, you know, stuff coming back to bite Eric in the ass, you know, him leaving the bag on there, having to go back and get it. So I'm curious to see if he's actually dead, you know. I really hope that if he is dead, that at least we get, you know, we get to be there when it happens story-wise. I hope this isn't it for Eric, because I just don't like it leaving that way and then later you find out he died in the elevator. I would rather us be there in his head as it's happening. But that's just me. But guys, let me know what you thought of tonight's chapter, and if you're looking forward to more of this book, and if you've enjoyed the book so far. Or maybe if you agree with my thoughts on the kind of inconsistency in Eric's character tonight. I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen when we meet back up with Charlie and Jess, or Tess as Charlie calls her. You know, since the death of his dear old girlfriend, who he didn't even remember the name of, just happened right before his eyes, right after he almost died, if not for Jess taking his attention away. So yeah, guys, I'll be back very soon with the next chapter or so. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, and
I'll see you soon.